Welcome back to another episode of Palisade Radio. This is your host, Colin Cattell. We're having so much fun putting out all these interviews over the last couple weeks, and we're just keeping up the momentum here, touching on a whole bunch of different topics. Today is something a little bit outside of the box we usually don't do, and this is talking about the importance of not just the industrial and precious commodities, but also the multi-nutrient agritech products that are out there and are, of course, a very important component of the overall market. Of course, as an investor mainly in metal, it can be hard to understand exactly how to kind of understand this space, how to value things. And here to talk to us today about all things in the space is an expert, Cristiano Veloso. Cristiano is the CEO of Verde Agritech. Cristiano, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Colin. It's a pleasure to participate.
Yeah, and before I jump in, I just want to say for listeners that Cristiano's company has a PFS coming out, which I'm very excited to see, and it's something we're going to talk about in this interview a little bit further into the interview. But first, before that, I was having a very interesting discussion with Cristiano before hitting record, and you made the comment about how Vladimir Putin should be receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. I'd love to hear your angle on that.
Yeah, Colin, it's a bit controversial, but if you take into account the control Russia has on potash prices and the extent that potash prices influence food prices, you can certainly make the case that the fact food prices remain so low and have been so low for the last 4 years has everything to do with potash prices equally being kept at some of the lowest prices over the last 10 years. And if there is a man the world has to thank for that, his name is Vladimir Putin.
And probably of less significance to our listener base by name, but probably equally of importance, is Alysson Paolinelli, who's a director of Verde Agrotech. He's been a World Food Prize winner. You can explain the significance of that, but huge person on the team. Tell us a little bit about him and the importance he has in the industry.
Colin, Alysson Paolinelli has a much greater importance than Putin. If the world is fed nowadays, if we have enough food production in the world nowadays, we should all be thanking him. Leave aside the price of it. We're talking about supply. He is the one who back in the 70s looked at a massive portion of the Brazilian land, a region called Cerrado, which wasn't back then no good for agriculture, and he came up with how you could develop that land. He came up with the science, but more than the science, he was chosen as the Minister of Agriculture. Back in the 70s, he was then the youngest Minister of Agriculture in his early 30s, and he came up with a national program to deploy his science into developing that vast amount of land into agricultural land. And if Brazil now is nowadays the world's greatest food exporter, if China can consume all the soybeans and all the other crop production from Brazil and other countries, it's thanks to this development. And this prize he was awarded is no doubt very, very important. It's the World Food Prize. The name speaks for itself. Very few people have been honored with that in the world. But this isn't his only prize. Just a few weeks ago, I was in a ceremony here in Brazil where he was being awarded another prize by the Bunge Foundation, and it was quite interesting because we had in São Paulo the governor of the state, Geraldo Alckmin. We also had the mayor of São Paulo, Doria, and we had those two gentlemen just competing between themselves to see who could make more compliments towards Alysson Paolinelli, what he represents nowadays, and what he has accomplished for the country. It's interesting that those two gentlemen, they are the two strongest candidates to be the next president of Brazil next year. So it was quite an interesting experience to see them doing that. And something else about Alysson Paolinelli is how much energy he has. He's 80 years old, but in a very quiet week, he will sleep at least in 4 different cities, given how busy his schedule is. Nowadays, still as the Brazilian Corn Growers Association president, and obviously helping us as a board member, going around and presenting our product to the industry and to the farmers. So we're very lucky to have him as a board member.
Excellent. Well, that does make a lot of sense. In the potash space directly right now, if price movement is any indicator of investor interest, the word potash alone can put people to sleep, but you have something that is a lot more interesting than potash itself. It's called SuperGreenSand is the product. It's been a huge mover in the cannabis space. You have quite a few customers that are using it for cannabis growth, but beyond that, it's also a huge product in your home country and your country's home country of Brazil. Can you talk to us a bit about the product?
Sure. So SuperGreenSand is a multi-nutrient, multi-purpose product. It has 68 minerals and trace elements. It will not only be used for crop nutrition, but has some other benefits to do with soil improvement and crop protection. It's true what you say about potash prices being a very sleepy commodity. And I personally believe prices for potash will stay as low as they are for the foreseeable future. And unfortunately, what we're doing in terms of product development, bringing in this multi-nutrient product, will contribute towards that. So you've mentioned on our upcoming pre-feasibility study, and the price we've used to value the potash content of our product is in line with the lowest long-term estimates we see from some of the most pessimistic analysts we have in the world covering potash. Unless, of course, Putin gives up the nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize, in which case we might see more excitement in this space and a higher price for the commodity. But I hope he doesn't change his mind and he continues contributing towards feeding the population, the ever-growing population, with very low price for fertilizers.
For sure, and I think that a big reason that investors are turned off by most potash is that most potash companies have mega deposits that are deep, require billion-dollar capexes, and the numbers simply don't work that attractively in this market. What is it that you're doing that is different than that?
It's a scalable business plan. So we're already in production. Our mineral is at surface, so we can grow it in a completely different fashion to someone who has to dig down a very deep hole and deploy hundreds of millions of dollars of capital costs. We're in production, and we will be continuing to grow up this production from accumulated cash flow.
Cristiano, in terms of timing on this PFS, when are you expecting to release this to the market?
Q4 2017. This was our promise earlier this year, and we will be honoring that.
I assume that from the existing production, you're going to, through the PFS, be expanding that production quite considerably. What does it look like in terms of your CapEx? I know you can only speculate at this point, but how that's going to be funded?
Accumulated cash flow. So the whole vision we had when we were discussing with engineering companies and doing the calculations was that the business could be funded vastly from accumulated cash flow. We definitely have in any version of our business plan coming back to raise funds from the market.
Excellent. And Cristiano, moving on to the market here. So we've talked about cannabis a bit, which obviously is focused on the North American market, meaning you're taking this product and shipping it to North America. What other markets are there aside from cannabis for the product?
Well, in the U.S., there's no doubt cannabis, as you said, is a very important market. Growers are looking for products which have no salinity or very low salinity, and we're unbeatable when it comes to that in comparison to regular products. Secondly, growers are looking at a more holistic approach to crop nutrition. So they're looking to provide the same way you have your multivitamins, your multi-minerals. Often they're looking to provide as many nutrients to the crop as they can. In that regard, our product again is unbeatable. It has, in addition to potash, another 67 minerals and trace elements, which is very important. But moving on and answering your question in terms of the other market in North America is organics. Organics in the U.S. is worth about $50 billion. We saw the acquisition of Whole Foods by Amazon.com. The organic agriculture market was about 10% per year. So this is another market where we are selling our product to in the U.S. It's certified, and that's something else where we expect to see sales growth. Leaving aside the North American market, we obviously cannot forget the Brazilian market. Brazil is the world's largest food exporter. And, going back to the example you raised of potash, Brazil is the world's largest importer of potash. It's the world's second largest consumer of potash. And there's no doubt our product will be supplying those needs. And that is another market we are developing.
On a very high level, what is the difference between SuperGreenSand and typical potash KCl? If you're going to a farmer and discussing that difference, what does that look like?
Well, in the two main differences you have is salinity and chloride content. So the conventional commodity, KCl, it's a salt, which brings a number of problems to certain crops and certain types of soils. The same way, chloride accounts for about half of the weight in 1 ton of KCl. And that chloride is not only an environmental problem, but it is also not ideal for a number of crops. On the other hand, SuperGreenSand, it has zero salinity and zero chloride concentration. So it can help farmers achieving a more sustainable production, a more profitable production.
In terms of developing the market in Brazil and educating farmers on the differences between the product, what's that look like? How has the adoption rate been?
It's been pretty well. Farmers are always looking for new products, or always looking for ways to especially reduce their risks. You have to remember that farming is a very high risk operation. Kind of similar to resources investment. But if you're a farmer, everything can go well. You can invest a lot of money on seeds, on fertilizers, crop protection. You can have fantastic weather throughout several months. But then the day you're harvesting, if you have bad weather, you can have high humidity, which will impact your quality of a production, and then it's a big loss. So everything that can help farmers to reduce their risk is very welcome. And this is something SuperGreenSand does really well. It helps farmers to reduce their risk because, one, there is no leaching from the nutrients we supply, so the nutrients will stay in the soil for as long and when farmers need it. Two, it will also help crops increase in its protection against pests and diseases. So that's the second benefit. Thirdly, it will help crops becoming more resistant against drought, against what they call abiotic stress. So all those advantages will not only be supplying the nutrients a crop will need in a given season, but will be protecting farmers and their investments in the case things go against them.
And Cristiano, are there any specific crops that this is being used for?
Well, there's several crops, but two of my favorites. One is coffee. Just in the vicinity of our mine, we produce about 1/4 of all coffee grown in the world. So, for every fourth cup of coffee you have, it's likely there was some things from Brazil. And when we spoke earlier about chloride, it's proven that chloride has a negative impact in the quality of your coffee beverage. So this is a major benefit we have. There's no chloride being added to the soils when you use our products. So we should all expect a growing quality of coffee, which I'm sure some of you quite enjoy drinking. The second one is sugarcane, which again is a major crop in the vicinity to give you an idea, between coffee and sugarcane in the vicinity of our deposit, we have about 10 million hectares. 10 million hectares. If they all were to switch to our product, would represent over 10 million tons of production of SuperGreenSand. And sugarcane chloride has another negative impact. A lot of that sugarcane is grown for ethanol production. Brazil is more than half of the fuel consumption in Brazil comes from ethanol. And to produce ethanol, you have a production phase where you have to burn your sugarcane. And when you're burning sugarcane, that sugarcane, if it was grown using potassium chloride, it accumulated chloride on its leaves. So you have Cl emissions to the atmosphere, which again combines with other elements, creating some ozone harmful gases. So that's another major contribution we can make to the environment by switching conventional chloride-rich fertilizers to a more sustainable product, which is what we are supplying.
Well, let's wrap back around to the PFS and concluding here. Currently, based on the information available publicly, you're talking about producing roughly 100,000 tons per annum. Obviously, the PFS is going to increase that significantly. What kind of levels of production are you contemplating in that upcoming PFS?
First expansion to 600,000 tons. Second expansion to 5 million tons. And the final production level of 25 million tons of SuperGreenSand.
Excellent. So investors can look for a significant, call it, production boost in the upcoming quarters of SuperGreenSand from your deposit. And of course, the excitement around the cannabis space has also been adding some interest in the story as you're becoming a go-to provider of the nutrients required for these growers.
Correct, Colin. And I think the upcoming pre-feasibility study will be very important for the market to better value the business plan we're developing, because it's a new product, because it is a different type of deposit. It's difficult for you to come up with an estimate in terms of an operating cost, sales price, capital cost, what sort of production size you can get to. So I believe the pre-feasibility study will, as an independent document, independent technical document, will help the market to value the opportunity.
Excellent. Well, Cristiano, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge on the fertilizer space and the Brazil fertilizer space. Just again for listeners, Cristiano's company Verde Agritech is listed on the big board TSX under the symbol NPK. Thanks, Cristiano, for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Think you understand the junior mining sector and you think that the participants in the mining sector, junior mining sector, are good people and kind people, hit the bid.
How violent that term could be, it actually could be quite violent. It could be a rip-your-face-off uranium rally.
And the world is always going to need raw materials. It's going to need copper and gold and nickel and so forth.
Totally destabilized. Hey, Troll, did you hear what's going on in Yemen?